Today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Kafchet. This is the Daf for Shabbat. Before we begin, I just want to encourage you all to join our annual campaign for Circle of Friends 2021. I want to thank everybody who's already joined. I want to encourage those who haven't yet, those who also have joined in 2020. I want to thank you for your previous commitment, and I want to encourage you to continue the commitment to help support, to help us to strengthen our success, to help us expand our services, to advance Talmud study for women. So please consider it. It's a donation of $360 and the comparison in different currencies. I want to just consider have you consider it's $1 a day to donate to an important cause. So please consider this, and you can find details on our website under Circle of Friends. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. We were in the middle of, we started with Rabbi Yehuda says, Ein bi'or chametz ela b'sreifa. And then we continued to say, where does he derive it from? We brought a braita that had a long discussion between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, trying to each prove where we can learn it from. So we ended with the end of the page. We had basically each time Rabbi Yehuda tries to learn it from notal, from what you do when you leave over the meat past the designated time. If it's sacrificial meat, it needs to be burned. And from there, he tries to derive that also on chametz b'Pesach will be forbidden, and it's very similar in many different ways. So we ended with the rabbis who questioned, but what about the chaylev of the shor and iskal? The last thing that Rabbi Yehuda had said is that both notar and chametz b'Pesach are forbidden to eat, forbidden to benefit from, and also you get karet for them. You get cut off right by the hands of God. Punishment is severe punishment in the hands of God. So therefore, since notar is supposed to be burned, also chametz b'Pesach, to which the rabbi said, but what about the chaylev of the shor haniskal? Where the shor haniskal is forbidden to benefit from, and therefore so is its chaylev. And also because it's chaylev, the forbidden fat, where in general you're obligated karet for eating chaylev, therefore also you'll have a case with the shor haniskal, which has all the criteria, and yet it doesn't get burned. Chazal Rabbi Yehuda v'dano din acher. He brought another law. Notar yeshno bebal totiru v'chametz bebal totiru. Notar, it says you cannot leave it over. Not just once you leave it over, it's burnt, but you're not allowed, you have to burn it, but you're not allowed to leave it over. So likewise, chametz also, you can't leave it over. That's really part of bal yira'eh, bal yematzeh. By the way, this is interesting because the first thing Rabbi Yehuda tried to do was to try to prove it from a kal v'chomer and saying, chametz b'Pesach is bal yira'eh and bal yematzeh. You cannot see, you cannot find it. And therefore, it's more stringent than notar. Here, they're kind of using bal yira'eh and bal yematzeh and saying it is like notar. So Rabbi Yehuda started in one way. He kind of maybe Chachamim push him into a corner, and you'll see even where they get even farther, where they push him into a corner and he says something that maybe doesn't exactly jive with what he said earlier. But in any case, he now tries to claim, well, both of them can't be left over. We all know we're in the middle of a debate with someone. Also, not even that it contradicts. It's a little bit different than what he said before, but maybe as he's thinking, right, somebody puts you up to the challenge, and as you go on, you think more and more, oh, wait, maybe it could be viewed this way, and maybe he really does do a bit of a change in mind, and he realizes that really they both are one and the same in this way, and not like he suggested in the beginning, the chametz was more strict because it had bal yira'eh and bal yematzeh, and notar didn't have that. But in any case, he says, so therefore, ma notar b'sleifa, af chametz b'sleifa. Therefore, just like notar needs to be burned, also chametz. Amrulo. So they said to him, wait a minute. Asham taloi v'chatat ha'of haba'ala safek. These are two cases of sacrifices that we bring when we're not exactly sure if we did something wrong or not. Okay, so or if we did something that we're obligated a chatat. I'll distinguish because it's a little bit different. Asham taloi is done in the case where we're not sure. Normally, you bring a chatat if you accidentally did something like eat chaylev, for example, we were just discussing. So then you bring a korban chatat. Asham taloi is if you're not sure. You ate a piece of fat. You're not sure was it chaylev or was it permitted fat? Was it what we call shuman, regular fat? If you're not sure, then you bring an asham taloi. This means it's a guilt offering that takes care of you until time that you determine whether or not you really did something wrong. If you never know, you never find out till the asham covers you. If you find out that you did something wrong, then you have to actually bring your korban chatat, your normal sin offering. But this is a hanging one, it's called. That's why it's called taloi, that means hanging. And it protects you in the meantime until you figure out whether you really did it wrong or not. So it's some sort of suffix offering, right? You're not sure you really need it, but you do it because you're not sure. Chatat ha'of haba'ala safek. This is a case where, for example, one of the cases you bring a chatat is a yoledet, a woman who gives birth. Now it depends whether she brings either she brings an ola and a chatat. Okay, those are two type of offerings. One, it gets burnt entirely, and one gets eaten by the kohanim. The chatat gets eaten by the kohanim. Now, if she's not sure, let's say she miscarried, but we learned already that it depends at what stage you miscarry, whether you're obligated to bring it or not. So she's not sure. So what does she do? Excuse me. She brings the chatata off ala safek. That means normally you're not allowed to bring an offering if you're not sure. Right? Let's say you're not sure about a chatat. So there's a special offering the Torah says you bring an asham talui. Most other offerings, there is no, what do you do? In this case, if it's a bird, okay, now a woman could either bring an animal or a bird offering. Okay, if she didn't have enough money, she would bring a bird. Now, a bird is a little bit different than animals. And because of that, even though normally you're not allowed to bring something that's not allowed to be brought into the temple, in this case, we allow you to bring it based on the suffix. They learned it out from a pasuk. We'll get to this later. Again, many things we're going to learn later more in depth. But now the idea being that she can bring this misafek. It's a little bit of a strange situation because the meat can't be eaten. Why? Because this is a whole other interesting thing, which is when they did the birds normally you do shchita, regular, right, slaughter the bird. But when it came to the temple, the only way you could eat the bird is if you do malika, which was the special way that the kohanim would basically put their thumb in the back of the neck and strangle the bird. And it was a type of way of slaughtering it only in the temple. Now, if it's in the temple, you're not, if you do it not for something temple oriented, it's not kosher. And you also can't slaughter an animal, a bird in the temple. You could only do malika. So therefore, here, since it's suffix and we're not sure whether, okay, the ola is very easy because an ola you can bring voluntarily. So when she brings the ola, she says, if this is an ola, if this I really gave birth, then this goes to cover my sacrifice. If I didn't really give birth, if I didn't miscarry and I wasn't obligated, then I'm bringing this as a voluntary offering. But you can't bring a sin offering voluntarily. You can only bring it if you're obligated. So in this case, we allow her to bring the bird misafek, but instead of the meat normally getting eaten by the kohanim, in this case, we leave the meat and you're not allowed to eat it. Now, this creates a certain interesting issue because there's still no tal, because maybe it's still sanctified meat. So therefore it runs out at a certain time, but you're also not allowed to eat it. So you're actually supposed to get rid of it before that time. So now we're going to go back to Asham Talei v'chatata ofa bal safek. That was a big introduction. Lidvarecha yochichu shehem bebal totiru sha'anu omrim b'sreifa. 1 second. Let's stop for a minute. Right. Oh, so they say to him like this. They said, Asham Talei and chatata ofa bal safek, according to the way you read things, Rabbi Yehuda, are going to prove that you're wrong. Why is that? Shehem bebal totiru. Okay, these both have bal totiru. Okay, you're not allowed to leave them over. Now, what's the issue? According to what Rabbi Yehuda has been saying, if it has bal totiru and it's forbidden to eat and it's forbidden to benefit from, which this all is, now we say it's bisreifa. Now, according to our opinion, we have a machloket with you, Rabbi Yehuda, somewhere else. Okay, this comes up in a different section. Now, we say it's supposed to be burned, and then your logic would work very well. That here we have another case where it's bal totiru and it's forbidden to benefit and it's forbidden to eat, and yet what do we see? We burn it. But you, ata omer b'kfura, you say those get buried, okay, because they're different. They're not the same because these are bought on suffix, okay? We're not sure about them. Rabbi Yehuda has a different rule about these two, okay? Again, we're not going to get into detail, tell us why right now, but he says that you bury them. That means that you don't, right? That's different. You don't burn them. So now what's Rabbi Yehuda going to say? They're basically saying you, right? You're the one who says if you're going to create that this is the rule, anything with bal totiru and forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit should be bisreifa. Well, that doesn't work for you because you actually hold that it's bikvura. So what's Rabbi Yehuda's reaction? Shatak Rabbi Yehuda. He was silent. And now we have 3 reactions by different rabbis who all say basically the same idea in a different quip. They each say, oh, this is what people say when they say the following. This was said about someone like this situation with Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Hainu de Amri Inshe, Kappa de Chata Nagra, the spoon that the carpenter built, Begave Nisrof Chardala. With that spoon, he's going to burn his throat with a hot mustard. Okay, meaning right? This is like saying you dig your own grave, right? So you basically created this spoon, and with that, you had this horrible, you burnt your mouth with the mustard. Amar Abaye, sadana besadane yatif, midvil yadei mishtalim. The person who created these stocks, this is where they would put people's feet in when they go to execute you. They put your feet in this space, or even not execute, but they put you as a prisoner. So they, instead of tying up with handcuffs, they used to have this thing where people, you can look it up online, there's pictures of stocks. Anyway, they would put your feet in, and that would hold your feet in place so that you couldn't move. So now they say the one who built the stocks ends up sitting in the stock himself. Midvil yadei mishtalim. He gets paid back from his own, what he did. Rava Amar Girai Begire Miktal Midvil Yadei Mishtalim. The one who fashioned the arrows, he's going to get killed by the arrows, right? His hands basically caused his own downfall. So this is what they're saying. Rabbi Yehuda's own unique position about the Asham Taloi and the Chatara Oaf basically knocked out his whole argument. Okay, and it's basically saying, right, you dug your own grave. And anyway, that's right. This is what they say also about nuclear weapons, right? You build nuclear weapons, in the end, it could cause your own destruction. You have to be very careful what you create. Okay, moving on. Chachamim omrim, mifarer v'zoreh v'chulei. Remember, the rabbis had said, even there were two different versions, that you don't have to burn it. You can break it up into pieces and throw it to the wind or into the water. And then, if you remember, we saw that the Rif had the version, our version said af, even. You could do it this way. You can burn or this way. The Rif said it's only this way. You can't burn. This is the way you get rid of it. Now, if you notice, okay, we have to go back to the Mishnah, but the rabbis said, right, I'll just read it. Mifarer v'zoreh o matil layam. Okay, so now, here comes the question. Hechi ka'ama. How is this read? Mifarer v'zoreh. There's two ways you could read it depending on how you put the verbs in the sentence. Mifarer v'zoreh l'ruach. You break it up into pieces and scatter it into the winds. U'mifarer u'matil layam. The word mifarer, to break it into pieces, to crumble it, is that referring to both cases? Both to, right, break it into pieces and scatter it to the wind, throw it to the wind, or break it into pieces and crumble it and throw it into the sea. Odilma, or is it read, mifarer v'zoreh l'ruach avamatil layam be'ene? Or is it read, crumble it and throw it to the wind, but you can throw it into the river or the water any way you want. It could be whole when you throw it in the water. Utna nami kabe avodah zara ki agavna. Exactly the same Mishnah appears by avodah zara. Rabbi Yossi omer shochek v'zoreh l'ruach o matil layam. If you have idols, you break them up into pieces and then you throw it to the wind, or you throw it in the ocean, in the river or the water. And they ask the exact same question. Hechi ka'ama shochek v'zoreh l'ruach. Again, does shochek apply to both? Do you break it up? And, I'm thinking of the word, like carve it, scrape it down, into nothing, like to crumble it into pieces again. V'zoreh l'ruach, it's just a different word, because with food, it would be to make crumbs out of it. With an idol, it would be to break it up into little pieces, right? It would be a different word. For some reason, the word eludes me right now. Shochek v'zoreh l'ruach, right? Do we say, v'shochek u'matil layam, before you throw it in the water, you also need to break it up into small pieces? O dilma shochek v'zoreh l'ruach aval matil layam be'enei. Or do you throw it in the water? You can throw it whole into the water. What's always the issue? The issue is we want to get rid of it. Right? We don't want someone to accidentally pick it up and reuse it. So let's think about that here. So Amar Rabba. Rabba says he's going to distinguish. He's going to give an answer, and it's going to be different for each case. And then we're going to see Rav Yosef, who also has an answer, also saying it's different for each case, but it's going to be the reverse. Amar Rabba, mistabra avodah zara de liyam hamelach ka'azla lo bai shchika. Now Rabba, there in avodah zara claims, and it's based on the previous Mishnah, where in this Mishnah it doesn't say you throw it to the Yam hamelach, to the Dead Sea, but the previous Mishnah said you throw it to the Dead Sea, and Rabba assumes that here also you're talking about throwing it into the Dead Sea. So he says like this, Yam hamelach. Now there's no boats in Yam hamelach. People don't go on boats in Yam hamelach. So there's little chance anyone's going to pick something up that you threw into Yam hamelach. So he says, avodah zara de Yam hamelach ka'azla, that's going into specifically the Dead Sea, lo bai shchika. It doesn't need to be broken up into pieces. So therefore by avodah zara it doesn't. Chametz, but when it comes to chametz on Pesach, you're throwing it in any river, then there's tons of people going by all the time. They might pick it up and accidentally eat it, and therefore you have to crumble it. Amarle Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Adraba, Ifka mistaba. I think it's the exact opposite. Avodah zarah de lo mimisa by shrika. When you throw an idol into the water, what happens? It doesn't fall apart or disintegrate. Therefore, you can't throw it in unless you break it up into pieces and destroy it. Chametz, but chametz, if you throw it into the water, it's going to disintegrate. No one's going to pick it up and eat it from there. Besides, it'll be disgusting, right? Waterlogged bread. So then it doesn't need to be broken up into pieces. Tani kavatei de Rabba, Tani kavatei de Rav Yosef. Now we're going to bring a source that proves each one. A bright Tanya kavatei de Rabba, and here we read Hayam halech bamidbar. Now again, the key is going to be, does it say miforer or does it say shochek? Miforer is a word that we use by bread, about breaking it up into crumbs. Perurim, perurei lechem are breadcrumbs. And shochek is the word used for avodah zarah, to break up a solid item into pieces. So now they say like this. If you were walking in the desert, mifarer v'zoreh laruach, you break it up into pieces and scatter it to the wind. Hayam halech basfina, if you're in a boat, mifarer umatir layam, you break it up, you crumble it into crumbs, and you throw it into the sea. So what do you see here? You see that this proves Rabbah, that when it comes to the bread, you have to crumble it into the water because it's going into any river and somebody might pick it up. Tanya kavatei de Rav Yosef, Hayam halech bamidbar shochek v'zoreh laruach. So here we're talking about idols. You break them up into pieces and scatter them to the wind. But hayam halech basfina shochek umatir layam. But if you're in a boat, now specifically, if you're in a boat, you also need to be shochek umatir layam. You also have to break it up, and that matches Rav Yosef, who said, right by chametz for Pesach, it's going to fall apart, so you don't need to. But specifically with idols, you do. So now they say, if each one supports each one, then each one's going to be a problem for the other. Shchika kasha l'Rabba. So the fact that you have to break it up before you put it into the water by idols seems to be a problem with Rabbah, who says we're not worried about it because it's in Yam HaMelech. And peror kasha l'Rav Yosef. And the one who says you have to crumble it into crumbs before you throw it in the water sounds like a problem for Rav Yosef. So shchika l'Rabba lo kasha hali Yam HaMelech hali shar na'arot. He basically says that second source that you brought must be talking about any other waters. There, you'd have to break the avodah zarah into pieces, smash it up, because otherwise it's going to end up in someone's hands because they'll be on a boat. But the Yam HaMelech, you don't need to in the Dead Sea. Obviously, we're talking about different kinds of chametz. There's chametz that will disintegrate, and there's chametz that won't disintegrate. If you have a bag of grains of wheat, they won't disintegrate in the water, of wheat kernels. So if in that case, he'll say you could just throw it in the water. You don't, in that case, he'll say, right, you don't need to break it up into pieces. Sorry, opposite. That case, he'll say you have to break it up into pieces, because if it's grains that won't get ruined in the water, then you'll have to break it up into teeny pieces so that no one can take it. But when you're talking about a piece of bread, then obviously he thinks that it's going to disintegrate, and therefore you don't have to break it up into pieces before you throw it in the water. So we've now resolved each one according to each. So the Gemara started with these two questions as if they're parallel questions, but then each person, whether Rebbe or Rav Yosef, distinguishes in a different direction between the two cases. New Mishnah. Chametz shel nochri she'avar alav ha'pesach mutar b'hana'ah, v'shel Yisrael asur b'hana'ah, shene'emar lo yira'eh lecha se'or. So what about food that chametz, that's a Gentiles, that basically was used over Pesach, meaning it went through a holiday of Pesach. Now, the Gentile is not obligated for having chametz, and therefore, if the Gentile owned it, and this is what we do nowadays, right? We sell it to a Gentile so they can have it on Pesach, and for us, it's permitted to benefit from after Pesach. But Shel Yisrael that avar alav Pesach, if it was owned by a Jew and the Jew had it on Pesach, then asur b'hana'ah, then you can't benefit from after Pesach. Shene'emar lo yira'eh lecha se'or, because it says you can't see any leavened bread, and if the Jew uses it, then it's going to be a problem. So the Gemara starts off, and it's going to take us till the end of the daf to actually even understand this question. It's going to be a very long question. Mani matnitin lo Rabbi Yehuda velo Rabbi Shimon velo Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara says, wait a minute. this Mishnah doesn't seem to follow any of the three opinions that we see quoted in the following Breita. And what we're going to do is we're going to learn the Breita. We're going to learn some parts of the Breita more in depth and try to understand them better. And then we're going to finally get to, at the very end of the daf, what is the question from this Breita? And that's why does the Mishnah not follow either opinion, either of the three opinions? So where are these three opinions come? Titanya, as it says in the following Breita. We're now going to have a debate about what is the status of chametz before Pesach, meaning Erev Pesach, from 6 hours, right, from midday till the nighttime, when it's forbidden by Torah law, what the status of chametz Pesach during the days of Pesach are, and after Pesach. If you left chametz all of Pesach that you still own, and now you have it after Pesach, what's the story? So we have a three-way machloket. Chametz, first is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Bein lifnei zmano, bein la'achar zmano, whether it's before Pesach, meaning Erev Pesach, half day, at the second half of the day, or bein la'achar zmano, or after Pesach is over, over alav belav. It's a lo taseh, a classic lo taseh. You get lashes for that. A negative commandment. Toch zmano, if it's during Pesach, we already know this, over alav belav v'karet. It's both a negative commandment, and you get karet for it. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon omer, chametz lifnei zmano ula'achar zmano eino aver alav below klum. Rabbi Shimon says, chametz from midday till the end of the day, there's no lo taseh involved. We're going to have to understand why. We've talked about it for a long time already, this Masechet, that it's a problem. So where does he get that there's no negative commandment? Number two, after Pesach, it's also not a problem. If you left your chametz and you didn't sell it and you didn't take care of it, and you still owned it and you wanted to use it after Pesach, you can. Or he doesn't say you can, but he says, Eino aver alav below klum, meaning there's no negative commandment. We'll see soon that what he's going to say is there's no lo taseh. Yes, it's forbidden, but it never says in the Torah, don't do this. Toch zmano, if it's during the time of Pesach, right, during the week, over alav b'karet belav. Everybody agrees that it's karet and the lo taseh. Umisha'asha asur ba'achila, asur b'hana'ah. And by the way, once it becomes forbidden to eat, it's also forbidden to benefit from. Now we're going to say in a minute, Atam the Tanakama, they were taking a break in the Breita to tell you, by the way, that was Rabbi Yehuda talking. Okay, why? Because it sounds like, according to Rabbi Shimon, that wouldn't necessarily be forbidden to benefit from. So they claim that this is talking about Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, the Rabbi Yehuda says, once it's forbidden ba'achila on Erev Pesach, right, then it will also be forbidden to benefit from. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, here comes the third opinion. Tameh al atzmecha, he'ach chametz asur b'hana'ah kol shiva. He says, what are you talking about? How could chametz be forbidden to benefit from all 7 days? Uminayin la'ochel chametz mishesh sha'ot u'lamala shuv. Okay, so now we're going to stop for a minute. So he basically says, fascinating, right? We've talked until now that chametz is asur to benefit from. He basically says, where did you get this from? Chametz is not forbidden to benefit from. So he has this opinion, the chametz of Pesach is not forbidden b'hana'ah. Okay, now we're going to go through the opinions and where they come from. How do you know that it's a lo taseh? From Erev Pesach. Okay, where does that come from? According to, obviously, we're saying Rabbi Yehuda because nobody else thinks it is. Shenema lo tochal alav chametz. Okay, so now it says lo tochal alav chametz. Which, okay, now, how do we know that that's talking about chametz b'Pesach? Because the context of that verse is Dvarim Tet Zayin, Psukim Bet and Gimel. It says, V'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem Elokecha, you should bring the Pesach sacrifice, okay, etc. And then it says, Lo tochal alav chametz. Now, alav sounds to be referring to the sacrifice. Don't eat when you're dealing with the sacrifice chametz. That sounds like negative commandment not to eat chametz on Erev Pesach. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. How do you know that that verse is talking about the sacrifice? It's true the previous verse talked about the sacrifice and the time that you're bringing the sacrifice. But if you continue in that pasuk, it says, don't eat chametz, which he says, lo tochal alav. Alav means on the sacrifice. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. But the next words are, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot. For the next 7 days, eat on it matzah. That sounds like it's not talking about the sacrifice because the 7 days are the 7 days of Pesach, not Erev Pesach, right? Not from the 14th of Nisan, but from the 15th for the next 7 days. So, im kain. Now, okay, so according to him, by the way, you'd have to understand what is alav. Alav means on when you it is related to the sacrifice, but not. Korban Pesach has two parts to it. One is when you slaughter it and do the sprinkling of the blood and all that during the day of the 14th, but you eat it at night. So it must be referring to nighttime, which means we're already talking about not Erev Pesach, but the night of Pesach. So now it says, so now, so why is it saying then lo tochal alav chametz? What, not, in this case, it doesn't really mean why is it saying, it means how do we read this verse? Okay, lo tochal alav chametz, 7 days you should eat matzah. It's to teach you, when you're supposed to eat matzah, that's when it's forbidden to eat chametz. And when it's not a problem to eat matzah, meaning when you're not supposed to be eating matzah, which is 7 days of Pesach, that's when the mitzvah is to eat matzah, then you're not, so only then is when you can't eat chametz. And that's when there's a negative commandment. So Rabbi Shimon says, there must be no negative commandment on Erev Pesach. So, right, the assumption is Rabbi Shimon thinks it's forbidden, but he thinks it's forbidden more from an aseh. In other words, you can derive it that it's forbidden, but not that it ever says don't eat. And don't eat means you get lashes. If it doesn't say don't eat, then you don't get lashes for it. My time to Rabbi Yehuda. So where does Rabbi Yehuda get it from? That this is really referring to Erev Pesach. And where does he get that it's also forbidden after Pesach? Tzlata Krai K'tive. There's 3 verses. It says, Lo ye'achel chametz. Okay, that's in Shmot Perek Yud Gimel. We saw this pasuk before, right? And, remember the day that God took you out of Egypt. With a strong hand. Hotzia Hashem etchem mizeh. God took you out from here. Then lo ye'achel chametz. And you can't eat chametz. That was where we learned Isur Hana'ah. Remember, lo ye'achel. And it also says, don't eat anything that can leaven. So what do you see here? 3 verses that all basically say, don't eat chametz. So, lo tochal alav chametz. And the one that we just quoted, lo tochal alav chametz. So, 3 verses. Chad lifnei zmano, chad lachar zmano, v'chad letoch zmano. One is before, one is after, and one is during. That's how he gets it. For Rabbi Shimon, what's he going to do with those 3 verses? Chad letoch zmano. So one is for Pesach itself. Now that's the only one he has because he thinks all the other ones are not negative commandments. The chomach metzet, the chomach metzet you need for the following drasha. Ainli ela elachidetanya, as it says in the following brayta. Ainli ela shenit chametz me'alav. We only have chametz that basically like a sourdough. It in itself caused the leavening, right? If you leave it long enough, you make a dough. That's what sourdough is, right? You make a dough, it eventually leavens itself. What if you use something else? Like people sometimes use wine or other things to basically cause the dough to leaven. You could use other things that could be used as leavening agents. So how do we know that that's forbidden? So he uses that pasuk to teach you kamach metzah means any kind of leavening agent. It doesn't have to be made from bread. Lo ye'achel chametz. So what does he do with that verse? Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer uses it for the following drasha that Rabbi Yossi Aglili says in a brayta. Minayin lepesach b'tzrayim she'en chimutzon oheg ele yom echad. How do we know that the year they got out of Egypt, they only didn't eat chametz for 1 day? Okay, that year was different than all other years. Talmud lomar lo ye'achel chametz. V'samich le hayom atem yotzim. Okay, that pasuk is right near where it says. I just want to see it inside. Right, hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh ha'aviv. That's Shmot Yud Gimel Dalid. And right before that came Lo Ye'achel Chametz. That was the very end of Pasuk Gimel. So that Pasuk led into Hayom Hazeh, which means it was specifically this day, God was telling them, this day you're getting out of Mitzrayim, and therefore Lo Ye'achel Chametz on this day. But in future, yes. Okay, so therefore that was referring to specifically that year, and it was to teach you that that year they only didn't eat Chametz for 1 day. For Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so now that's what Rabbi Shimon used those other 2 drasha for, whereas Rabbi Yehuda used all 3 drasha to teach you the 3 different times. So now we have to figure out what is Rabbi Yehuda going to do with Rabbi Shimon, and where does he learn those 2 things that Rabbi Shimon just learned from the other verses when he's using those verses to teach you Chametz is Asur before, during, and after Pesach. So Rabbi Yehuda machmat bar achel minale. Where does he learn that if you leaven something with something else, it's going to be forbidden on Pesach? It's not from Kol machmetzet lo tochelu. The lo tochelu is coming to teach you it's forbidden. But the word machmetzet, it could have said something else. The fact that it chose to use the word machmetzet, a leavening agent, that was to teach you any kind of leavening agent. To Rabbi Yossi Glili Menale, where does he learn that one from? That year they only didn't eat chametz for one day. Maybe just from the fact that lo yachel, we're going to learn for what Rabbi Yehuda needs it for. But the fact that it's mentioned next to hayom, we could also darshan something additional. Or maybe he just doesn't learn this drasha at all. Maybe he doesn't think that if two things are next to each other in the verse, you can learn something. And maybe he doesn't have that drasha. Amar Mar, another thing we're going to go in depth into from this Braita. Sorry, that's the end of the Braita, right? Okay, we had 1 second, right? So then we ended the Braita with right. We ended the Braita a while ago. Then we started going into the reasons for their opinions. So now we're going back to a line we quoted before. How do we know that it's forbidden from 6 hours and going forward on Erev Pesach, according to Rabbi Yehuda? Right? That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon, and then we brought Rabbi Shimon, who said to him, what do you mean? We already said, lo tochal alav chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot, meaning it can't be referring to the day of the sacrifice because it's talking about the 7 days of Pesach. So therefore, that must also be talking about on Pesach itself. The Rabbi Yehuda, Shapir Kamalei Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon actually has a good point. So how does Rabbi Yehuda learn this? Rabbi Yehuda Amar Lecha, Hahu Kabay Chova, Afilu Bizman Hazehu Da'ata. It's to teach you that to make it Chova, even Bizman Hazeh. In other words, you might have thought, what might you have thought? That verse says that when you should bring the sacrifice, right, to the temple, and then it says 7 days you should eat matzah. Okay, it says don't eat chametz, 7 days you should eat matzah. Now, what might you have thought? Maybe that's only connected to a time when you're bringing sacrifices. But maybe when there's no more sacrifices anymore, like the time they were living in, maybe there's no obligation. So he says that's why it comes to teach you Shivat Yamim Tochal Chametz, Lo Tochal Chametz, Shivat Yamim Tochal Matzot. That even now, they want you to know it's a chova to eat matzah even nowadays, even now that there's no sacrifice. So lo tochal alav chametz and shivat yamim tochal alav matzot, it's to teach you, you still have a mitzvah, you still can eat chametz, and you still have a mitzvah to eat matzah even bisman hazeh. Rabbi Shimon, so where does he learn that this is still an obligation? Nav kalemi ba'erev tochlu. Okay, it says ba'erev tochlu matzot. Now it also says al matzot u'merorim yochluhu. You're supposed to eat the sacrifice with matzah and maror. And then it tells you also eat matzah at night, which means, right, the first night there's a special mitzvah. You don't have to eat matzah all 7 days. But erev tochlu matzot comes to teach you the first night you're obligated. And therefore, he learns from there. Why does it say both psukim? It's to teach you that you eat matzah at night, even if you're not actually doing the Korban Pesach anymore. Okay, even if you don't have the Korban Pesach, and even though you're supposed to eat the Korban Pesach with matzah and maror, nowadays that we don't have the sacrifice, you're still obligated to eat matzah. So that's what he learns from Ba'erev Tochlu Matzot. Right? We're doing, again, the classic ping pong. If this one uses this verse for that, what does the other one use it for? For Rabbi Yehuda, what does he do with Ba'erev Tochlu Matzot? It's to someone who's impure and can't do the Korban Pesach on the regular time, and they usually do Pesach Sheni. Well, this is coming to teach you that you still eat matzah that night. You might have thought maybe your whole Pesach experience is pushed off a month. No, you still eat matzah on that night. That's what he learns from Ba'erev Tochlu Matzot. Salkadat Hachamina, you might have thought, Ho'ilu b'Pesach lo yochal, since on Pesach he doesn't eat the Pesach. Matzah u'maror nami lo nechol, so maybe he doesn't need to eat the matzah and maror either. Kamashmalan, that's why you need Ba'erev Tochlu Matzot to teach you. You eat it anyway. Okay, so each one learned different. For Rabbi Shimon, so now what does he do? Where is he going to learn Tameh v'shaya b'derech rechoka? Lo itzrich kra. Oh, you don't even need a verse. De lo gara me arel uben nechar, because it's no worse than an arel or a ben nechar. This is an arel, someone who doesn't have a brit milah, who can't eat of the korban pesach with you, or a ben nechar, someone who, like a slave of yours who lives in your house, but right. Ben nechar. Right. The ben nechar is a. Right, Rashi says it's a mishumad. In other words, this is someone who leaves Judaism, they're not allowed to, okay, even though they're still considered a Jew, they're not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. So basically they say, someone who, now if they're supposed to, now what does it say? Let's just go on and then we'll go back. Can't eat the Korban Pesach. What are we darshan? He can't eat from the sacrifice, but he can eat matzah and maror. So now what do they say? A tameh v'shaya b'derech rechoka is no worse than that person. So therefore, if they can eat matzah, are obligated to eat matzah and maror, then obviously also a tameh, or someone who is far away from the temple and can't do the sacrifice, also, right, either he's impure and he can't bring the sacrifice because of that, I didn't explain this before, or he's far away. These are the people in the Torah that came to Moshe when it was time for Pesach the first year and said, listen, we can't do the Pesach. What are we supposed to do? Moshe goes to God and God says, okay, I'll give you Pesach Sheni, but we'll do it the following month. So now, if the Ariel and the Ben Nechal can't eat the Korban Pesach and yet are obligated matzah and maror, then obviously so is this tameh and shaya b'derech rechoka, and therefore you don't even need a verse for that. Now, obviously, Rabbi Yehuda thought you needed a verse for it because, again, there's a difference because they have a makeup time and maybe you think their whole Pesach experience is going to be a month later. No, it comes to teach you they still have a partial Pesach experience. They just can't bring the sacrifice. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, k'tiv b'hai, k'tiv b'hai. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we need it in both places. Okay, now, finally, we're going to end with this today. Mane manitin. So where do we start? We brought this Braita, if you even remember this, because we brought our Mishnah. Let's just review the Mishnah. Chametz, shavar alav, right, of a nochri that he had over Pesach. A Jew can benefit from after Pesach, but a Jew having chametz on Pesach, you cannot benefit from. So now they're going to say mane manitin. Doesn't match either opinion. Rabbi Yehuda chametz damaka amar afilu nochri. Rabbi Yehuda said any chametz that avar alav Pesach. Right? He says there's 3 verses. Any Pesach is any chametz is forbidden to you, even after Pesach, which seems to imply even a Gentiles. Rabbi Shimon, Yisrael nami mishra kashari. Remember Rabbi Shimon? He said it's not forbidden b'hana'ah. Right? That's what he said. He said there's no lotase. Okay, and therefore, even if a Yisrael, if there's no lotase, the assumption is it's permitted b'hana'ah after Pesach. Okay, remember he said it's not forbidden before Pesach, it's not forbidden after Pesach. There's no negative transgression, and therefore the assumption is it must be also permitted to benefit from. Remember Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, what are you talking about? Chametz on Pesach is permitted to benefit from. So he thinks even during Pesach, so for sure he wouldn't think after Pesach it would be forbidden to benefit from. So therefore we're stuck right now, and I'm going to leave you here hanging with which opinion does this match. Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov to everybody.